You're listening to Permission To, the podcast where we dive into the science and soul of owning your worthiness as a perfectly imperfect human being. I'm your host, Sam Dew, psychotherapist, positive psychology coach, mama to a beautiful 5-year-old Amelie, and passionate advocate for living an inspired life. My aim is to show you that you have full permission to own your worthiness so that you can embrace your true nature and begin walking boldly toward your dreams. Let's dive in. Today I am chatting with the incredible Julie Parker. Julie is the founder of the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, co-founder of Priestess Temple School, and a mentor, counsellor, coach, supervisor, guide, and certified breathwork facilitator for sacred leaders and space holders. And I have had the privilege of being mentored by Julie before, and I can tell you that it is just a beautiful, expansive, generous experience. So welcome, Julie. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sam. I'm genuinely looking forward to the vulnerability and realness of what I know is going to be this conversation ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you being here and sharing from your heart and your stories, because this is quite a vulnerable topic. Before we dive into your story, I'd just like to touch on something we were chatting about before I press record. As is always the case, often so much gold happens before you press record on a podcast, right?
Sure does, yes.
So could you share with me a little bit your views on self-worth and whether it's something that impacts a lot of people?
Well, from my perspective, Sam, I'm 51 years old, so I'm in midlife plus, and I've also had 25 plus years now experience as a psychotherapist and almost 20 years as a life coach and a mentor. I feel quite confident to say that self-worth is something that impacts us all in some way or another. And if we have a general awareness around what it is, then we understand that, or it's at least important for us to understand that our self-worth is not something in our lives that is static. It's not a destination that we arrive at and say, I now consider myself to be worthy. And then we might never then experience self-worth wobbles or doubts or issues ever again. This is one of those things that we all work on for life, and we absolutely can improve our relationship with ourselves, undoubtedly. Of course, you and I believe that, because we would not be doing the work that we do if we didn't. But it's something that exists on a continuum. It is something that we are growing with, healing with, walking and moving with all the time. There are lessons about our self-worth and our relationship with ourselves that I think unfold for us for life.
I agree. I think, that image of peeling back a layer of the onion, it's kind of we feel like we've worked on our self-worth and then something else comes up and there's another layer and another layer of kind of work to be done.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know what? It's not even necessarily sometimes about things coming up. Sometimes it can just be something as simple, in inverted commas, as life and aging. Because we know, for example, that for a lot of people, their self-worth can be tied and connected to how they feel about their body, for example, just as one example. Well, the body that I have now at 51 is not the body that I had when I was 21. And so how I'm moving through this particular stage of my life as my body is changing with perimenopause and moving into menopause, and I now have silvery, streaky hair and all of those sorts of things, is very different to how I felt about myself as a 21-year-old young woman. And so sometimes these things where we're journeying with changes in our self-worth are journeys that we're changing with simply because we're changing and we're journeying through life as we go.
Yes, I think a lot of self-worth stories come up around motherhood because it's such a big change, and it's not necessarily that your self-worth has changed, it's that your role and your identity and your life has changed so much, and sometimes your identity and your self-worth is almost trying to catch up.
Completely.
Mm.
Times of transition, when
Yeah.
we're in them, when we're in the messy
Mm.
middle, when we're in a sticky stage, we can't necessarily see, quite literally the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And it's only when we lovingly and self-compassionately, as much as we can, move through that time to come out towards the end or the other side, that we can begin to develop more self-awareness around who we are now and what we need now in comparison to who we were before that transition occurred.
Yeah, I love that. So what story would you like to share with us today then about a time when your self-worth was a little bit wobbly or felt a little bit more shaky than usual?
Well, I'm going to call a spade right from the start, Sam, and say that this was a period of my life where my self-worth was not just a little bit wobbly. It was outright in desperate trouble.
Okay.
So I'm going to be really frank with you there, and I'm taking everyone back to a time when I was in my early 30s. And this experience of having significant difficulties with my self-worth and my relationship with myself centered around the breakdown of a relationship. And I think that this can be a story or an experience that many people might be able to relate to. And it's tied up with heartache and heartbreak and feeling once loved and then not loved, and a whole lot of things in between there. And like so many relationships, this one started and began beautifully, and I fell deeply in love. And the short version of the event, of the experience, was that I believed in my heart of hearts that this was a relationship that was going to end in marriage and children and be forever. That is genuinely what I believed at that time. That was not the case. And looking back now, of course, with hindsight as a magnificently clear set of glasses to look through, I realize now that that was not the case probably only about 4 to 5 months in. However, the depth of love and romance that I was feeling and experiencing at the time did not allow me to see that. And as can be the case for, there might be somebody listening who has had an experience like that, I now recognize that I was in a relationship that I was significantly more invested in than he was. I think he was in the beginning, but not for as long as I was. The relationship ended, and I felt quite literally like my whole world was crashing down around me. I ended up experiencing a clinical depression, which is something that I had never had significant mental health difficulties before then. I was also, I think it's important to add into the mix at this time, a therapist myself. And so I was a difficult case, shall we say. I was a therapist needing therapy, and we are not easy clients because we know all the tricks and all the things, and we can be resistant and pushing back at ourselves, which is what I did at the time. How has this happened? Like somehow or another, I thought that I was not human. It's like, how can this have happened, Julie? How could you let this have happened? You can't be experiencing depression. You're a therapist. Like somehow or another, that magically meant that I was immune to it in some way, which of course none of us as human beings are, no matter what we do, whether we're a doctor or anything, a therapist or anything in between, a psychiatrist. We all can experience mental health difficulties, and we know that we do. And within that period of time, I also undoubtedly had the most significant in-depth experience of losing myself, is the way that I call it. I lost confidence in myself. I lost belief in myself. I started to make assumptions about who I was, not just within the context of that relationship ending, but also began to predict into the future that I was never going to find love again, that I was never going to be happy, that I had lost the one chance that I had for love and connection. And that thankfully has turned out to not be the case at all. And I'm now very happily and lovingly married, and have been for a very long time, to someone else. Let's just clarify that, to someone else. But that, or I might stop there, Sam, and then allow you to guide me wherever you want to go. But that was my story at that time, and I'm here to also let everybody know it took years to come back from.
Thank you for sharing. I felt some kind of tears on the edge of my eyes just listening to your story, because you're such a rich storyteller. So I really felt like I was there, but also I feel like I had such a similar experience in my 20s, and it was actually what made me become a therapist, because I had a period of depression, went and saw a counsellor, and it was so life-changing that it inspired me to be a therapist. And I think there is something about a breakup that can really shake our self-worth and our identity to the core. It's just, it's real, especially if it was a long-term relationship, or if it was a relationship where we really saw that was our future.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It certainly was the case for me, and I've known it to be the case for many other people as well, which is why, of course, we must remember with our whole hearts that anybody that we know that is experiencing a divorce, for example, even if they know in their hearts that it is the right thing or the best thing for them, or the breakdown of a long-term live-in relationship or anything like that, my heart goes out to you if that is you right now, because you believed in something that is not going to go the distance that you believed with your whole heart would. And that is not easy. That is a challenging thing to let go of, and it brings up a lot of things for us. It makes us question our judgment. It makes us question our lovability. It makes us question our communication skills, our connection skills, it makes us question many, many things about ourselves, which of course then directly impacts our self-worth.
Because I don't know if you can relate to this, but for me, there was definitely a thing of, I mustn't be good enough for that person. Like, that's why it didn't work out, or, like.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. I honestly could not count the number of times that particular very damaging thought went through my mind. This is you. There is something wrong with you. He is amazing. How can you have let this happen? That clearly you're not right. Clearly you're not enough. All of these things that directly dig into your self-worth, your self-love, your self-belief. And if you're not then careful, and I certainly exhibited some of these behaviors, then start to make you not just think, but actually behave in really unhelpful ways.
Yeah.
This is when we start to do things like people pleasing, like giving up what we believe in trying to please someone else or keep a relationship going, and in varying different ways. But I'm also now, I was not at the time though, don't get me wrong, I was not at the time. One of the things that I am now incredibly grateful for at that time is that this deep blow to my self-worth and the ending of that relationship was the catalyst for what I can only describe as a spiritual awakening. And I do not believe that that would have happened with as much depth or as much clarity and also meaning for me at that time if it had not been for the fact that I needed to reach out for help and I needed to find new ways of thinking about myself and walking through the world.
And it's like, I get a sense it's like it was such a dark time in your life, but there was also, this really powerful, energetic kind of spark of recreating yourself and redefining and changing the way you're thinking and living and being in the world. And that's so significant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hugely significant because this experience of depression, of anxiety, of needing to take time off work extensively and not being able to do the thing that I loved, basically to enter into a deep stage of healing. That's the only way that I can describe it, through a combination of therapy, but also exploring and finding at that time beautiful self-help books and teachers and guides, meditation. I learned how to meditate for the very first time in my life at that period of time. And that was life-changing, like learning to, first of all, be with my thoughts, and be with myself, which was at the time, a really significant thing because I did not like myself. I hated myself. I was doing everything that I possibly could to not be who I was at that time and not face up to the reality that this relationship was over. And I now had to move forward without this person in my life. I just did not want that to be the truth. And so I would do all sorts of things to try to forget that that was the case, whether it be eat, whether it be stay out all night with a girlfriend, whether it be not go to bed until 1 o'clock in the morning to fall asleep, and, all of those kinds of things, none of which were helpful. But it was when I began to find things such as meditation, I began to exercise more, I began to spend significantly more time in nature and connecting with my both inner and outer world, that I was able to begin to understand how to soothe and self-regulate myself at a much deeper level, and then change those thoughts I was having about myself and reclaim my self-worth and move forward with it, feeling differently about myself in a new and more empowered way.
I think it's really special that you're sharing this because, as you said, you were a therapist, and I feel like people always assume that therapists already do all of the things that, inverted commas, we should do to look after ourselves, and forget that we're just human beings having a human experience like everyone else. So I think that's something that just really stands out for me, that, even as a therapist, you still had to learn how to love yourself and nourish yourself again.
Yeah, and I think the operative word is again. It's not like I That's right.
Yeah.
I had a handle on myself,
Yeah.
and I was looking after myself, and I
Yeah.
was very, very good at what I did. And I'm still very, very good at what I do.
Yeah.
I think I'm even better at what I do as a result of having that experience.
Yes. Yeah.
When I went back to my therapy work, and by then I was also life coaching and working with women from all over the world, I was better at what I
Yeah.
did after having that experience.
Yeah.
Do I necessarily believe that I wanted to have that experience, or if I could? No, I didn't want to have it.
No.
In 20 plus years later, I'm so fine and okay that I did, but it took many, many years to look back and be okay with what took place there, because it was incredibly painful. It was very sad and dark and painful at that time, but also filled with rich and incredible lessons that I now still carry with me all these years later. But here's the thing: when you're in it,
Yeah.
when you have fallen over
Yeah.
for any reason, whether it is a relationship, whether it is motherhood that has brought you to your knees, whether it is grief, whether it is severe physical changes in your life, a sickness, an illness, anything of that sort, you are just like any other human being.
Yeah.
The chemistry in your brain changes. How you feel about yourself, your thought processes change. Your subconscious mind and what you believe about yourself shifts. And you do not necessarily have the hindsight or the foresight or the wherewithal or clarity to see it when your heart is broken, or when you are getting 2 hours sleep a night, if that, as a new mum, or you are dealing with huge grief or severe physical pain or anything that you're in it. You can't see better than anybody else. It does not matter what kind of training you've had.
Yeah. So true. It's like that. I often draw this image for clients. It's like when we're looking at our problems and they're so close to us that we just can't see them. And we have to step back to be able to look at them. And often we need like a coach or a therapist or someone external to do that, because when we're in it, we just can't see clearly, can we?
No, and I certainly couldn't. And that's when I realized I needed help. And I got that help, and it was life-changing.
I think, and I think you've already really touched on how you looked after yourself, like in terms of, nature, therapy, meditation. Is there anything else that you did to take care of yourself, your heart, your nervous system during this time that you want to share?
Yeah, I did mention this briefly before, but I think it's something, and I know that this is an enormous privilege that not everybody has, but I took 3 months off work.
Yeah, okay.
I was able to do that mostly paid, because I had the leave that was available to me at that time. 2.5 months, I think. I'd been working in the workplace I was in full time for many, many years. And I had quite a bit of sick leave that was available to me, because other than that, I was perfectly healthy and well. And I also used some annual leave as well. And this was something that my therapist encouraged me to do. And initially, I was incredibly resistant about, because it felt like that one thing that I was sort of holding on to about my self-worth in a way. Well, at least I can still go to work and do that, and I'm good at what I do. I didn't want to let that go. And it actually took a really, really straight up, looking down straight into my eyes kind of thing from her, from this very, very experienced and much older than me therapist at the time, to have her say, but here's the thing, you're not good at it at the moment. I was so deeply offended. Like when she said that to me, I was outrageously offended. And it was like, well, internally I was like, well, how would you know?
Yeah.
And then quite literally, as soon as I had that thought inside my head, I thought to myself, of course she knows. You are falling apart literally in front of her. You're crying, you're not sleeping, you're not eating properly, you're not functioning as a human being, Julie. You know that she is right. You know you need to stop. And so I had to swallow really hard, and I cried buckets. I remember it so well, like it was yesterday, and we're talking 23 plus years ago. And she said, it's okay. She said, give yourself the time off, take a break. And, by the time I arrived home and sent the email to my workplace and I had a very beautiful and understanding manager, the relief was extraordinary. And I think actually that was the day that my healing really began.
Yeah, because sometimes, I know for me as a therapist, sometimes if life is feeling hard, there is something about being in the therapy chair that really fills my cup up and my self-worth cup up too, if I'm being honest. And yes, I imagine taking that away when you're already feeling so vulnerable, would have been so scary. But then it sounds like it was also, really, really integral to your healing.
Completely. And I still, looking back, believe that I was turning up well for my clients in a performative way.
Yes. Yeah.
It was like, okay, big deep breath, next one, you've got this. It was hard, it was challenging, and I don't necessarily think anybody would have really known that.
Yeah.
But of course, there's no way that I could have been giving the very, very best that I could. And it was the right decision. And so, again, I know that it was, I had circumstances that allowed that to be possible for me, which I know is not the case for everybody. But for anybody listening, if you're ever in a similar position and you can take a break of some kind from having to perform duties elsewhere, it's a wonderful thing to do. Shout out to all the mums who can't clock off. And are listening to this right now.
I know it's hard sometimes as a mum, no matter what's going on, you're just like, I have to keep going. But although hopefully we also have people that we can call if we really feel like we can't. I think that is really, it's the thing that stands out for me is that sometimes when we're going through these really, really hard, dark times, we do everything we can to avoid it, to keep ourselves busy. And some of those things are healthy things like working, and unhealthy things. But I have a sense that you just like stripped everything back. So there was no avoidance of what you were going through at that point. You were just facing it head on.
Yeah, I was. And again, that was a very privileged position for me to be in, to have those 12 weeks to do that. And there were great days and movement forward, and there were also really challenging days as well. I spent some more time with my family. I went away on a little holiday with a girlfriend got some sun, and I went to a lot of therapy appointments. I did a lot of reading. I cooked for myself a lot. I really tended to me significantly, during that time. And it was not perfect and everything was not sorted at the end of those 3 months, but I certainly was a lot stronger and a lot more connected to myself than I was when I started, where I felt incredibly lost.
And when did you notice like that your self-worth had started, you'd kind of maybe started to remember and reconnect to that, beautiful sense of being enough and being important? Do you have a memory of that shift? Did it kind of sneak up on you, or was it like a big moment?
I don't think it was a big moment, no. I think when I started to know that things were improving and I was returning to myself was quite literally when I began to realize that he was not a part of my every waking or dreaming thought.
Yeah.
And that I was not fixated on what he might be doing, what we might be doing if we were still together, and worried about the future. That instead I began to just live again significantly more in the present moment, which was a present moment and time that no longer involved him. And so when I started to realize that had shifted and changed and my mind was not as fixated on that as much, I knew then that things were shifting and changing for me.
Sounds like you became really in touch with reality and also more accepting of the reality of it as well.
It's a perfect way to describe it. Yeah. Whereas previously, up until then, I had very much been living in a false hope that things were going to change, and they were not.
I get that. I feel like everyone will be able to relate to that. I definitely can. And sometimes it drags out the grief period of a breakup, doesn't it? But I think it's really normal to not want to accept the relationship ending at the beginning.
Completely, especially when we hold on to hope, or we have fear about what that ending means and who we are without someone. Of course, we are each our own person, but then we are also a part of something when we are in relationship with someone, whether that be an intimate relationship, a friendship, a parent-child relationship. We all play different roles. We have different thoughts and feelings about ourselves based on who we are connected to. And that's not the only thing that we have thoughts and feelings about our self-worth and self-belief about, but it's one of them. And so when one of those relationships ends, especially in circumstances that we were not expecting, because it came as a huge shock to me, even though, again, with hindsight, when I look back, the clues were there and I was just not seeing them. Our entire perception of ourselves changes.
Yeah.
This can happen with the ending of a friendship.
Yes.
Which is often, I think, particularly for women, the breakdown of friendships is something that we often do not talk about, and how painful that can be. How difficult that can be. And it's the same. It can make you question yourself. It can make you really shift and change so many things and how you feel about yourself. And coming through that is a time of transition that's not easy.
I think to be human means to be impacted on by our relationships. Like, we're not meant to have this rock solid identity and self-worth that never ever changes based on what's going on in our life, are we? To be human, it is to be fluid and to shift.
Absolutely. And if any of us, I believe, I know that this might be a bold statement to make, but, I feel like I can claim it in a way, as, at my age and with lived experience now, is that someone's bypassing themselves entirely if they are thinking that somehow or another their relationships with other people and the ebbs and flows and challenges and difficulties and joys and highs and lows that we all experience with those do not impact our self-worth in some way. I just literally do not. I can't comprehend how that is actually humanly possible. And for anybody that thinks that it's not, I think there is a level of wall, maybe denial, lack of connection, bypassing that's going on there. And I'm not saying for one moment that that means there is anything wrong with anybody that might be experiencing those things, but I truly do believe that at some level we are all impacted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be really vulnerable to admit that, can't it? Because we'd rather be 100% in control of our sense of self-worth and 100% in control of our identity. But we are, I think that's a really powerful, bold statement. And if anyone could make it, you can, Julie.
Well, I don't want to give anybody the impression, of course, that we're not that the person that most chiefly impacts our self-worth is ourselves, because of course that is the truth. How we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, these kinds of things they do, of course, live with us. But it's like, the Insta quote, boss babe, some of the things that we see out there in the social media world that, say things like F what anybody else thinks, or, that kind of thing. Well, as human beings, it's not that simple. We're actually hardwired for connection. I'm not for one moment saying that, of course, we cannot control what anybody else thinks of us.
Yes.
We cannot control how anybody else behaves towards us. But to say that how people may feel about us and how people may behave around us does not impact us at all, I feel is inhuman. Like it's just inhuman. It's like, it does not mean that we have to fall in on ourselves, that if somebody doesn't like us, or if somebody breaks up with us, or if somebody, or anything within that realm, that means that there is anything wrong with us, or, all of those kinds of things that we've been talking about. But to think that doesn't impact us in some way, I just can't feel that. Like, Sam, if I was to find out tomorrow that you didn't like me anymore, I would be upset about that. I would live. I would move on with my life, but I wouldn't like it.
Yeah, well, that's never going to happen for starters, but you're speaking my language, Julie. I did a podcast a couple of months ago called Permission to Worry About What Others Think of You. Instead of, because it was something like that, I can't remember, but it was literally, I was sick of everyone saying, stop worrying about what other people think of you, and like making people feel like there's something wrong with them if they do care what other people think. I was like, actually, we are like hardwired for connection, and that's because like we needed it for survival. So if we don't start by normalizing that, then we are essentially gaslighting ourselves up, because we're thinking, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I really care what Julie thinks about me, instead of like, actually, that's really normal and human to care what other people think, And of course, it's personal. There's a spectrum. Like, I obviously care a lot more what you think about me than like someone I've never met on Instagram.
Of course.
But we do care. We do care, and I think that just makes us human. So,
and thank goodness for that. Thank goodness we do care, because it is part of being human. And yes, there is perspective here in continuum. If I open up my phone after this interview and someone's dropped into my DMs and I've got no idea who they are, and they say, I don't like you in your work, it's like, I'll move on. And it's like, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if it's somebody that I like and admire and respect, that's a different thought or feeling process altogether. It is okay to care. It's human to care. It makes you a connected, feeling, sensitive beautiful person. The issue is about how much you care and what it then impacts or influences you to do or not do. That's the thing that we have to be careful about, that we don't then care so much that we stop ourselves from doing things that we want to do because we're fearful of what someone or that person may say or think, or that we don't start to put ourselves last and everybody else first to get their needs met. So somehow or another that will ingratiate us towards them. That's what it's about. It's not about the caring in the first place or the feeling in the first place. It's about then how that impacts you and what you do with it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So much yes to this. I feel like I want to make a record of that and put it somewhere. So before we wrap up, I think we were talking and you explained it so beautifully about how when you're in it, you can't see it and you need support from other people to kind of almost help you see a way out. I would love for you to just speak to anyone who's listening to the podcast today, who's maybe where you were back in your 30s going through a rough breakup, or just any other time in their life where it's really shaking their sense of self-worth, their identity. You have any like words of wisdom or anything that you want to kind of say to them if they're listening today?
Oh my goodness, this is a beautiful question to finish up on, Sam. And the one thing that is, I mean, there's so many different things that I could say here, but the one thing that is coming to me, which was such a significant part of my own experience, is to, first of all, I'm sending you so much love, because I know that the phase and this period of life that you're going through, which will not last forever, is really challenging and difficult. And if it's one thing that I would lovingly like to implore you to explore, is how can you get radically self-lovingly honest with yourself about how you really are and what is happening for you. What I mean by that is not being in denial about the fact that you might not be sleeping properly, or that you're having increasingly anxious thoughts, or you're crying in the car all the time in private because you know that it's about the only place. I cried in the car a lot when I was driving because my flatmate couldn't see me. I couldn't cry at work. How are you eating? How are you taking care of yourself or not? And just really lovingly taking stock of everything that is happening for you or not happening for you that is not usual, that is in response to the deficit of self-worth and self-connection and self-belief that you are experiencing right now, for whatever reason that may be. Because as soon as you can get lovingly honest with yourself about all of those things, a combination of, or even just some of them that might be happening for you, then think about that like a loving friend and what that loving friend might advise you to do. And I would strongly suggest to you that in there will be some suggestions around making changes and probably reaching out for some support and help, even if it is just, in inverted commas to begin with, a loving and trusted friend that you can tell with full heart and honesty what's really going on for you. Because once you're there, then the light will begin to crack through and you'll start to see the road back.
Oh, I am going to make a special tag for this episode. I feel like anyone who is going through a rough time, a breakup, something like that, is just going to receive those words. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing such a personal story. I know that everyone listening is going to get so much out of it, and I'm just really grateful for you.
Such a pleasure, Sam. Thank you so much for having me on.